actually want to segue into our next topic here, which is a really interesting re-review / investigation that Hardware Unboxed and Hardware Canucks have done with Intel's Arc B580, finding that, somebody just collapsed a topic, finding that it has a complicated performance profile depending on what you bench it with. So while making a video about the Arc B580, Hardware Canucks ran into problems when pairing the Intel GPU with older hardware. They tested on an i5 9600K on a Z390 motherboard with resizable bar on. Now, Intel has been completely upfront that resizable bar is necessary.
Yep.
We were like, hey, how much performance uplift, downlift, whatever, and they're like,
doesn't matter. Turn it on.
Turn it on. It's basically, from our point of view, the minimum system requirements are you have rebar, period. Okay, all right, fair enough. In many games, performance seems to be on par with the competition, but in other games, the B580 struggled to keep up with even a GTX 1660 Super. And this is a card that performed abreast with a 4060, even sometimes a 4060 Ti in our review. An important note, by the way, Intel Arc does not officially support 9th gen Intel CPUs and 300 series chipsets, even if they have rebar. These are 6 to 7 years old, with 15th gen chips releasing in October of 2024. So that's important to note, but Intel only explicitly ever said, hey, you got to have rebar. They never really said, okay, you can't. Official support. Okay, well, whatever. Take it for what it is, official support. Okay, well, what about AMD? Hardware Unboxed did some testing. They found that officially supported AMD CPUs like the Ryzen 5 5600 and the 3000 series also saw significant drop-offs in performance. Arc seems to have more CPU overhead, whether it's in its drivers or, well, I guess it would have to be its drivers, compared to other cards. So as you go down in generation and down in the product stack to older, less performant CPUs, graphics performance is seriously impacted in games that are especially already CPU intensive. Lower frame rates, like when running in 1440p, are less impacted than higher FPS 1080p results, which makes sense because 1440p with medium or high details is going to be a lot more GPU bound and a lot less CPU bound. Hardware Unboxed put up a more extensive review today. This says today, but when were these notes written? Whatever, recently, with some interesting results. So go check those out when we're done here. Both Hardware Canucks and Hardware Unboxed report that Intel is aware of their findings and is currently looking into the matter. I mean, here's a question.
That looks like it was today, 16 hours ago.
Discussion question. How many generations of CPUs and chipsets should we reasonably expect a GPU maker to support? And I think that's a complicated answer because in the case of something like a 5090, I wouldn't even think that it was that outlandish if NVIDIA came out and said, yep, here's the 5090. It's $2,000. We're offering official support for Ryzen 7000, Ryzen 9000, and Intel 13th Gen and up. Because realistically,
GPU.
The vast majority of people buying this thing are either buying it in a brand new system. Don't underestimate how many people are buying GPUs in full systems. The like discrete individual GPU market, you don't matter.
I will say who,
straight up,
because I don't know if this is private or not.
I
was talking to an SI while I was at the event. They said they've never had this many pre-orders, and they did genuinely zero marketing to the point where they almost hit it. They've never had this many pre-orders.
Don't underestimate it. And then number 2 option is they're putting it into a system that is probably pretty new. If you have $2,000 to spend on a GPU, you have a freaking ton of money to spend on, not a GPU.
Yeah.
Unless you're crazy, in which case, I mean, you do you. However, I'm going to offer an alternative take on that. If you are pitching your card as a value card, it's $250. I think if you come out and say, yeah, we support this generation and the last generation, you're going to get laughed out of the room, much like Intel did with Arc Alchemist. Because it was an even bigger problem then to only support rebar platforms.
Yeah. Because
rebar was a relatively new innovation, or it was relatively new, at least to consumer platforms. And so with B580 coming in, essentially requiring not only rebar, which I think would have been fine at this point, because that takes you back like at least 5 years. How far back do we have to go for rebar? I think about 5 years. So that takes you back a good number of years. Not just that, but requiring a recent platform, I think it really harms the value proposition of the card. So I guess we'll see how this plays out. I mean, I'm trying to think back. I forget whether it was AMD or NVIDIA. I think it was NVIDIA a while back and when I say a while back, I'm talking like 8 or 10 years or something like that, where it was found that their driver overhead was greater than AMD's, and so their performance ranking was changing the farther back you went. Like there was a similar conversation. Okay, well, if you remember it, then it must be 8+ years ago.
Yeah.
And NVIDIA went to work, and they cleaned up their driver, and they made it less overhead, and they like talked about that over the next couple of cycles, and then it has become less of a conversation. I'm hoping that that's something that Intel can do. I don't know that for sure, but given the kind of progress that we've seen on their driver development over the last couple of years, I have some faith. It's blind faith, so take it for what it is, but I hope they're able to do this.